Originally built in 1750, 50 Berkeley Square has haunted the city of London for centuries. Strange lights, ghostly apparitions, and Lovecraftian beings are reported to reside in this location, and several mysterious deaths have been attributed to the horrifying figures who call it home. But is 50 Berkeley Square truly haunted? Or is there some other explanation for the stories of the macabre that happen within its foundations? What is the nameless thing of 50 Berkeley Square? Here we have one of the most intriguing stories of ghostly hauntings in the history of the world that blends the line between paranormal and eldritch horror, which we will be discussing tonight on Friday Night Frights. I'm your host, Christian Ashley of Systematic Ecology, here to terrify and instruct you all on the weird, unusual, fascinating, and fantastical and unexplainable things that may or may not lurk out there in the world. I'm joined once again by my co-host, Joe Day. How's it going, Joe?
It has been far too long since we have been able to get up to some spooky nonsense up here on Friday Night Frights. Y'all, I hope that your holidays were grand and that you spent some time to stay spooky in the midst of all of it. I know I did. Man, I'm ready to get into this one because I did not know. I had heard of this in passing in being a part of the paranormal field and all of that, but I didn't really like dig into this until it was ready or until it was time to cover it on the show, and this one gets weird.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a moment, like how I came into this, and I came into it fairly early, so I'm very interested to see where this one goes. And yeah, speaking of once again, unprecedented in the show's history, we had a schedule slip once more because I forgot to ask Joe what he could do last month. I had an entire month in which to ask him a question, a very simple question, one would say, and yet it didn't happen. So I went, "Oh wait, I was supposed to do that." And we know it. We did it in February now. So here we are. We're back. We're going to get into it again. Will there be another schedule slip? Lord willing, maybe not. But you know what? I also know us, more me and my scheduling. So, whatever happens, happens. We're having fun. So just as a reminder, our schedule is to allegedly, once again, once a month, cover one of six categories, that being cryptozoology. This month we're doing a paranormal, religious strangeness, the weird and the unexplained, which is kind of the catch-all term for everything else that doesn't fit into one of the neat little boxes I put here, true crime, then ufology. So you can listen to us on podcast form on the Systematic Ecology YouTube page for Friday Night Frights. So yeah, without any further ado, Joe, you said you had kind of heard about this before, but like, what was the first time you remember hearing about the case of 50 Berkeley Square?
So, back in many moons ago, we'll say, I was active in the paranormal field. I've told some stories about that, but I spent years doing it, and part of that time, when ghost hunting and stuff like that got really popular, and there were a lot of teams, and there were a lot of conventions going on, and all of that, you do the circuit. And a lot of the vendors there that write books and things like that write haunted America style books. So hauntings within some geographic location. Some of them just went throughout the entirety of the United States, so on and so forth. And so I want to say that this was like a write up on this was in one of those like haunted America sort of books, and that's where like but it was very much the 5 minute Reader's Digest version of it, like Victorian haunting, all of that sort of stuff. But like I'm watching videos of others that have reported on this, and I'm like, Eldritch beings, Cthulhu, what is going on here?
It's a weird and wacky one, man. Like, I was about 9 or 10 when I first heard of this. My dad, when he was a kid, had bought two separate books by Daniel Cohen, and one of them was cryptozoology based. So, you had your Loch Ness Monster, Yeti. That was my introduction to them at that age. But he also had like a real ghost stories book by Daniel Cohen. And this was one of the ones that was covered in there. And this freaked the hell out of me as a kid, who, by the way, was a very big scaredy cat back in the day. It's not like the fear is gone from me. It hasn't been exercised, but it's not as bad as it used to be, we'll say. And reading about what's happening here, this strange, you know, house in England where all these weird things are happening. There may be a ghost, there may be some nameless thing that's crossed dimensions and it's like terrorized people to the point where they can't speak anymore and they've died of fright. Like what's going on here? So like this is one that's been carried with me for many, many years. And it's been a long time since I've actively looked into the case. So this was some very fun nostalgia, we'll say, investigating this once again.
Yeah, so this whole story, so like I'm watching, and part of it is the way that you are first exposed to it in the presentation and all that jazz, absolutely. But like even down to the facts of this case, this reads like a Stephen King book. Like this feels like Stephen King had his hands on this particular story. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And it's to me, and you know, maybe part of it is the bombastic nature of it, but we'll get to this at the end in more detail. But this is one that going from A to Z, it is more compelling than your average like Victorian haunting of style story. Even the ones that get weird, I'm not just saying like ghost story for ghost story, because y'all strap in, because this is going to be more than just a standard fare ghost story. But it's still, as a whole, you look at this and we as enthusiasts of the spooky and all of that, there's a level of, well, is this possible, that you have to approach, and like you kind of got to give some latitude a little bit to live in the moment. You know what I mean, and kind of immerse yourself in the story as you're going through these things, and taking in this particular one. This is one that I found myself more compelled to be in the moment with than some of the others that we've covered for the show.
Yeah, I definitely get that because, I mean, this is taking place in a very distant from our time, but one is familiar enough we can go, okay, I can imagine what's going on here, but then I also can't because we've got some very different stories being told here from different genres at times. It feels so. I'm ready to get into this. But I do want to ask you a question. You can see on the outline there. Do you want to save that question for later on? I'm just thinking about this right now, live editing. Uh, do you want, because it might spoil some things?
Yeah, let's save it.
Okay. All right. So, you know what? Let's just get into this bad boy. And let's go into the history of the home, some of the reported sightings and encounters that have happened over the years there. So, simple enough. Like I mentioned before in the intro, this home was, made in 1750. And for many years, there was nothing, at least it's been reported, that has happened, in its halls that would say, hey, this is why something would happen. And at one point in time, it was actually owned by the then current Prime Minister, George Canning, if I'm remembering correctly, in the 1820s. Now, our story really begins as far as like the paranormal stuff with the introduction of a gentleman known as Thomas Myers. Now, there's some reports that it said that he had just divorced, but most of them actually state that he had actually had suffered, a failed attempt to woo the woman of his dreams, who was, I think, it was actually his fiance, but it kind of broke apart. There's differing reasons as to why, some of which may be because of who he is, or maybe he became a result of who he is after this. Like, uh, one thing you're gonna have to deal with here is we're dealing with something that happened many years ago. So some of this could be hearsay. Some of this could be only one person reported it and they only got some of the facts down. We're not entirely 100% sure. So Thomas Myers uh, bought the home in 1859 and lived in it until the mid 1870s when he would eventually die in the home. Anything you want to add before we head on?
Yeah, I mean, I think even hearing the opening salvo, I think you lay out a really good point for the listeners to consider. This is a setting in a story that, at least the earliest notes of it, happen at a time. There's a reason why the setting of England, Victorian age, that sort of setting in the puzzle pieces here are used in so many ghost stories, are used in so many paranormal stories. And usually when you're setting the table and all of that, when you say, oh hey, look at this is very standard fare, oh hey, look at this is very Lovecraftian, oh hey, look at this, that's, you're already like, holy crap bro, you got like two lines into the story and you're already expositing it and all of that sort of jazz. But it's, I cite it to, I point it out to say, so even thus far, it's cool. Let yourself be in the moment as far as like this really enticing sort of setting and all of that. But remember that you're just getting started, and let that feeling kind of guide whether or not you think the other stuff, because it's going to take a left turn at Albuquerque that you didn't see coming.
Yeah, if you this is your introduction to the case, you're in for a wild ride. Um,
Yeah.
I was not prepared as a child. I wouldn't be prepared if I heard this for the first time right now. So getting into this, Myers, one of the things that he was really noted for is that as a result of his melancholy and what we would probably, you know, what's what I'm looking for, diagnose him, an actual doctor, not me, with depression after dealing with the failure of meeting with the woman he loved, and he, as a result, slept during the day, became even more of a night owl than I am, and would live at night practically uh, all the time. Wouldn't really go out of the house much, if at all, and stay up all night. And one of the things people would note about him is that he would seemingly just kind of like maids and servants would say that he'd like seemingly like aimlessly roam around the house, guided only by candlelight. Because this is once again Victorian England, electricity not as popular quite yet because it hasn't been made quite yet, and then produced to where everyone has access to it. So you have to go by candlelight. That's all you have. And what people would do when they were actually walking around the house at night is they would see this candlelight moving around the house in a haphazard fashion. It didn't seem like there was a purpose because, like, they would see people like go by candlelight because that's what you had to do to see in the middle of the night. But the way he did was so erratic that it was so noticeable to them. Like it was almost like he was a specter in their eyes. And some people even wondered if he was dead years before he passed. So like arguments have actually been made as well about whether or not he became like totally agoraphobic in a sense of being afraid of the open spaces of being around multiple people, or this is more what I would put out there: the idea of him becoming a hikikomori, which is a Japanese term for people who, for whatever reason, probably psychologically, get to the point where they refuse or can't even imagine leaving their own home. Now, once again, is that me diagnosing the problem from afar? You can say armchair psychologist. I calls it like I sees it.
Yep. I think
Now,
that's a reasonable assessment to make for somebody like that.
yeah. And Myers himself would eventually pass away in the year 1874, and the house would pass in the different alternating hands. Sometimes it would seem like it'd have no owner at all, and it would fall into disrepair because some people would argue because of the things that were in there. Others would say it wasn't worth the risk of renovating the home and trying to send it off there. There also may be a potential criminal element. We'll get there in a moment. Who may not have wanted this to be sold elsewhere or seen by other people. So we'll get there when we get there. So that's the end of Myers' life. Anything you want to add, Joe?
So there are some accounts that people would hear loud, like, noise chanting from the house, and this is where some of the first mentions of like occult practices and different things like that are brought into the conversation. And it's not a huge shock. I mean, even to say if he was like, let's go full on, like, if he was, it was Victorian England, and the occult practice was at at kind of a fever pitch, while also going hand in hand with a panic response to it. So you have an issue. It's one of the rare cases of hysteria pointing to a legitimate thing, but you still have the hysteria. You still have the fear. You
Yes.
still have the othering of anybody who seems like they're up to no good. Oh, you must be practicing the occult.
Yeah, let's also like put this in time. 1874 is 14 years removed from when the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn would be created. We covered a little bit of that when we did the Crowley episode of Crowley, as I should say. Then before this, the Hellfire Club had been a thing in England for some time. There's been huge arguments over history whether or not there was legitimate people who were looking for satanic and or just remove that from it, just magical things, or whether it was just a gentleman's club that wanted to look cool. Uh, maybe we can do an episode on that later on. But like, this is something that's in the public consciousness of could he be a member of an organization like this, or could he have been seeking these secret magical items, maybe to find a woman or something like that? Or the thing you're going to hear is a lot of the stuff that comes out about this case is through um, not less than credible newspaper sources, but more like gossipy, scandalous. Like, can you imagine what Myers is doing up there? Has he gone mad? And it kind of devolves from there to whether or not, well, okay, something is happening. Are the papers true, or is there something else involved? Or are they just sensationalizing things? Like newspapers tend to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And there wasn't an expectation for credibility in that in with those magazines, because it's kind of like if you were to turn on the television and you see like reality TV or something like that,
Yeah.
and you're like, oh, this seems fantastical. This seems like these are people that are going through exaggerated situations and things like that. Yeah, because reality TV is entertainment, and the people are the actors. They're just going by their real name. And at this point in history, that form of entertainment, that vehicle of entertainment, was in these like periodicals, these tabloid style magazines, different things like that, that were 100% opinion driven or gossip focused or something along those lines, and sometimes making sensational sort of claims. But again, there wasn't an expectation that of anything otherwise at the time.
This is also the time of the penny dreadful in England. The idea of
Yeah.
like sensational stories, like Spring Hill Jack, Jack the Ripper later on, all these fantastical things happening around you. Well, they're the ones making more stories about them because they were selling like crazy because people were so interested in them. I'm pretty sure there weren't any penny dreadfuls made about this case, but like in the public consciousness, they'd be thinking about things like this because yeah, it wasn't just newspapers. Like I said, it was magazines, like spreading things to like whatever sells. That's what they're going to keep printing. All right. So here's the part of the story where we discuss okay, well, yeah, he's died in the house, but like, what is actually the source of the hauntings? Is it just him? Well, potentially it could be just him, but there's also other alleged stories given by the people. And once again, temper yourselves here. There are multiple different stories that kind of contradict themselves about who could be potentially or what could be potentially behind the hauntings here. So I'm going to go through them systematically and we can decide if we like one or not, or if we hate them all. We'll see once we get there. So the most popular tale was that the attic room of the house in 50 Berkeley Square was haunted by a young woman who committed suicide by throwing herself, from the top of the building. After allegedly being abused by her uncle. And you may notice as we go forward here, proper nouns aren't used a lot here. So I'm not saying that it's like you should automatically, your skepticism senses should be going off completely and this is all false, but like it should be like in the back of your head. Uh, the next one, oh, sorry. And as far as her appearances, people would say, well, for all of these, they kind of amalgamate them and say this entity, whatever it is, kind of takes the form of this kind of brownish mist, which is very atypical. You would expect a more ghostly figure in white and every now and then a blacker coloration. But this one is brown, and it every now and then would take that ghostly figure of a woman in white, but primarily the people who saw it claimed it to be this brownish mist. The next story we have up is that allegedly there was a young girl there who died being mistreated by a house servant. Some people say like physically abused, and as a result of the trauma she suffered under this, she died in the attic room, and that's her spirit lingering on there. And the final big one, I'm sure there are others out there, but these are the primary ones, is that it's not a woman at all, but a young man. Probably when they're talking young man, could be anywhere from like 12 to 18, maybe even 20, depending on who's telling the story. He was kept hidden away in the attic, kind of like, your man in the iron mask kind of scenario there, and was periodically fed and given water without human contact. And eventually he just kind of died. And, as a result of the suffering and trauma, he's the one who left his spirit behind to haunt this place. Take it away, Joe.
So, part of looking at the history of a place that is a legitimate history that uh, showcases a lot of options that are um that sound a lot like folklore that you could find in any town. Multiple places across the United States and across the world have a woman in white
Mhm.
style story. Many places have a a suicidal woman comes back from the dead sort of story. Or I heard two versions of that. One that she is like, she's seen all over the place within the house. And then one of them that very specifically, it's like a replay of there's a woman out there who jumps and disappears. Like you don't see the actual fall, and like that kind of plays on a loop every once in a while, sort of thing. um I When you have a story that has a lot of these individual components to it, you always have to make room at the table for it is a story during a time that is generally considered spooky, with very little in the way of accurate historical documentation. You have standards that are not that are present today for what we would think of on taking account of historical situations that were not present then. And then you have story archetypes within the paranormal genre that, if you chart this back, would have been to folklorists, to um, storytellers, to folks that would be in charge of these periodicals. Would be present in the cultural zeitgeist. That all of those things, like you're gonna sit there and you're gonna look at the thing and it's gonna sound like a chicken and it's gonna walk around like a chicken, and at the end of the day you got to be like, yo, am I looking at a chicken? You know what I mean? Now, I would argue that the power comes in the multiplicity of accounts, because most of these have some, even small sliver of an anchor into reality, into something that traces back to a person, traces back to a feasible situation for the time and the place and the circumstance and the so on and the so forth. Um, I think sometimes, just like making an account for, sometimes if it walks like a chicken and it talks like a chicken, it's a chicken. You have to say, um, sometimes if it walks like a chicken and talks like a chicken, it's an interdimensional space demon that's gonna rip your soul out from your body, and that's just what it is. You know what I mean? And so, sometimes when we look to the spooky and we look to the horrific, or we look to the other about our universe, we some of the most compelling stories, or some of the most well-worn uh um architectures of storytelling, are born out of situations and circumstances in life that you really cannot explain through modern science. And the reality is, when you look when this is a case that I think you need to immerse yourself in the plurality of accounts and perspectives and circumstances in order to be able to get the most accurate picture for an opinion. I think if you take any one of the individual accounts and try to use that as a leg to stand on, I think you're going to topple over, or you're very clearly, you're only setting yourself up for one outcome. You know what I mean? Like, if you are opening yourself up to any possibility of the supernatural, you've got to take the entirety of this place's account into consideration.
You brought up a good point earlier about how in multiple regions, just in U.S. alone, there's always the same story in multiple spots. There's always a story, like you said, of the woman in white. If you pick her up and you take her to her house, you go to her mom will be there and be like, "Oh, she died 14 years ago going to prom or whatever," or the different ghost lights that'll appear different during train tracks, and it was this railroad worker who died and he's trying to warn people away, or you've got your bunny man stories, your goat man stories. Under the bridge, there's this figure in a mask, or he may even be some type of mutated creature. What's another good one? Oh yeah, the story of if you put your car in neutral at these specific locations, ghostly
Train
kids will
tracks.
come up and yeah, it will push you ahead because that's where they died. Like, uh,
Yeah.
it may have sounded earlier like I was discounting a lot of this because there are different stories told about this, and I wasn't. I'm trying to say that like full blown knowledge here. There are different accounts of this, so it is possible for all of them to be true, but I don't really think so. So I think there's some truth hidden in all of these, or maybe some of these, it would be a better way to put that, of where we could potentially narrow it down because as far as I am aware, no one has ever actually written a book that has documented every single person who lived in the house and every single thing that happened to them. So we could say, hey, there was a girl who died when her servant did this to her, or there was a young man who was kept in an attic here during 1832 through 1838 or whatever. So there's a possibility these things are real. I don't discount them simply because they sound like a bunch of rumor mongering, especially considering the time we're in. Now, if this were happening today and there were 50 different stories, or even just these three different stories, and there were no proper nouns attached, my skepticism senses would be going off immensely because things are way more documented now compared to back then, and more things have survived, I should say, to this day. So don't hear me say that there's no way this could be happening just simply because there are three different ways the story is told. And that's just three ways we've chosen to tell you. There are other ones out there
Oh
that
yeah.
aren't as popular.
Oh yeah, no, there's at least the one that comes to my mind that I heard one when doing research for this that you didn't mention, was a different a girl with an abusive uncle sort of story,
Well,
and that it was
that
the
was the first
spirit
one.
of the young girl.
This
No,
one, that's
it was
that
a
story of
different one.
her. Oh, different one. Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, a different one. So it just goes to show you that, like, it really does depend on where you're sourcing your information, but also where they're sourcing their information, like where your source is sourcing their information from. Um, yeah, and especially so local to me, we'll say, is a place that we affectionately call the church. We call it the church whenever we talk about it public facing, because we don't want people to go there. But it is a place that is wild and crazy kids. We'll say that. But what's interesting is one of the claims to fame of the area is a it's not purely a woman in white story, but it is but it falls into that category of paranormal encounter where there's somebody on the road tragically died, the whole nine yards. Now the running theory is that anybody that's experienced that, which I have not, but anybody who's experienced that, it is a ruse. It is a guise that what
Mm.
is actually there wants you to fall for, and for you to be, because this is not like I said, that's it's buckled up to some private property. It's a whole thing. We don't want people's land to get trespassed on in the whole nine yards. But B, um this is big boy stuff. Like this is not for the faint of heart. But I only bring that up to say, like, it even that ties into like a woman in white style story. And like sometimes for places that are otherwise legitimate, you still have some sort of tie to a folkloric tradition sort of thing about the paranormal. But also, we have to work to keep it quiet. Like, there are 87 different ways for people to find out about it in the modern context. And so I say that
Mm.
to say your bit about um if it was written 50 years ago, if it was written in a quote unquote modern day, or within reason, and we have as scant of information as we have today, as we have about this today. um yeah, I think you'd have to address some things. I think I'd have to know what the circumstances are. Like I said, being aware of a spot that we otherwise actively don't want to. But that's not what this place is. This place is pretty friggin' infamous. You know what I mean? Like, when you're talking about, like, this is a place that sits among the pantheon of the most haunted locations in England. You know what I mean? Like, you're not, this isn't quiet. And so if
Yeah.
all of that and that little information and all of that sort of jazz, but that's what I think we're saying the same thing of different perspectives are being talked about. And as we'll get into, and I'll let you get on with the proceedings here, as we'll get into, there are some conversations and some topics that come up that that might just have something to say about why it seems like so many people experience very, I'll say, unique or specialized sort of encounters that don't really, like, seem to fit a trend or a continuity in the place.
Go ahead. We'll go to the next one. So while Myers was still alive in 1872, he was hosting a guest, Lord Littleton, someone that we can't account for historically. He stayed the night in the attic of the home, because he'd heard stories of the haunting. So these stories were starting before, Myers died. They had started obviously with him walking around, but there were also reports of the other things happening. And Lord Littleton had brought a shotgun for protection because Britain used to be cool. And upon seeing, the alleged apparition, he took aim and he fired multiple shots at it because that's the proper response to anything weird. You know what? You want to find Bigfoot, you got to shoot him dead. It can't be any of this business of, oh, he looked too human-like, I couldn't do it. No, shoot him dead. Bring the proof home. Uh, Bring the ghost home. If this is indeed a ghost. It, maybe you should have rock salt instead of regular bullets, and maybe that's why it failed. However, later on, when he investigated the area during the day, he found the shells left behind from the attack and nothing else to give an indication that anything was hit. Which, if this is indeed a ghost or spectral figure of some sort, I kind of expect to happen. Uh, but Littleton himself was alleged to be rattled immensely by these events, and like the legend goes, in a very opening up of King Tut kind of way. A curse was put upon him, and some argued it played a part in his eventual suicide 4 years later. I'm not trying to downplay a man's death or say that this had to happen. He had to be afflicted by a ghost for this to happen, because that's a very poor way to look at the mental health of all this. And there's also something to say about the mental health and how it was perceived in a day for all the people involved here. We could also talk about that later on. But I think it's people wanting to connect things because it makes for a better story. And I bring up the King Tut thing and the curse there because I think that's also the case there if we ever do cover that.
Yeah, I think I think there's a reality to what you're to what you're talking about here, because I'm not sure that it was that this was an intentional motif that we have arrived at, but it's almost like we're telling two narratives at the same time when we talk about this place. Because on one hand, you are 100% correct. When we talk about, like we talked about before, of like sometimes if it sounds like it is hot garbage, sometimes it's a ghost story. And then you add on top of that the reality of we are just now, as humans, coming around to the idea of, oh wait, the brain is an organ, like the heart that we know can malfunction, like the lungs that we know can malfunction, like all these things that we know, and the brain can malfunction too. What? You know what I mean? Like, we're just
Yeah.
getting to that point where we're not always othering when it comes to to mental health. So we're talking about like 100-ish years ago. Like, we're talking about like a time that might as well, when it comes to specifically mental health, and specifically like look into the history of the Europeans' take on mental health and how it was discussed or talked about or things like that back then, and even to today there's still a huge stigma around it. um so yes, if you are preloading the context of this could be a bedtime story filled with people who are otherwise need, you need to have a therapist come in and start passing out diagnoses like they're candy, and start, getting people straight, you know what I mean? Like, that is a very real component of the story that you have to, if you look at a case like this, that's what makes a case like this so complicated, and why so many of us, myself included, like, look at the realities of the field and say, dude, this is a field that attracts mental health issues. This is a field that attracts, you're talking about the paranormal, y'all. Like, and this hasn't changed. Like, I can tell you, in the modern context, there is a reason why, especially now that, as clergy, I am a mandated reporter. There's only so much exposure you want to put yourself towards folks that could be just making everything up, just absolutely outside of themselves, and see an opportunity or think that it's real, legitimately think it's real, and all of that sort of stuff. Like, all of this is a very present thing when you're talking about this sort of story. And so that has to be kept in mind, while also saying, like, yes, but what if, and we'll get there, but what if Lovecraft was onto something? I'll just leave it like that.
Yes. Because that plays into a couple stories that happened here. Like the next one on deck in 1879, there was a maid, nameless as far as I saw, who had slept in the night in the attic room. Whether she knew about it or not, I also couldn't tell about the haunting. So, and in the middle of the night, for some reason she was never able to explain to others, she fell victim to madness and she was incarcerated at a mental asylum. And was more as I researched into it, didn't seem like anyone had too many questions for it. They just went, "Oh, no, she slept in the attic room. She's insane now. Goodbye." And like many other people, was kind of shipped off and left behind forever. So there's that one. Then that same year, and this story has variances as well. It's either an unnamed nobleman or I did see some person give a name to this captain. It's either a nobleman or a captain, or maybe a noble captain. I forgot to put the name down. He spent the night there too, having heard of the stories, and he was gifted with a bell that was to be used. Like, if he felt it was in peril, like, I think the one ring was just for like everything's fine, whatever. But like two rings or more, it was like, hey, I need help. Come in, help me, help me, help me. And he continually rang it, even upon other people entering the room and like trying to look after him. Having witnessed the being so terrifying that he himself was rendered unable to speak. What do you think, Joe?
Yeah, so I there was a little more seasoning on the version that I heard,
Oh, go
that
for
this
it.
was a dude that was setting out very specifically to debunk the entire thing. He thought the entire thing was absolute and utter nonsense, and trying to be a tough guy and being like, "Okay, here's this bell, if you happen to be right, only come if I ring it twice, because I could fall asleep and hit the bell and it'll go off one time, but then uh apparently it could be heard like constant, like when it went, like it was just at a constant rate, and that's when they found him. And it was also noted that a single shot was heard, and that when they came in, they saw the bullet hole in the wall, and that
Yes.
he was like catatonic in the corner.
Yeah, which raises, if the story is true, raises a lot of implications about what the heck this thing is that I'm not quite happy about. And this was the story. I remember this one specifically as a kid that scared the literal hell out of me. Of like, I want nothing to do with this place. I'm going to keep reading because Mama didn't raise no quitter, even though I'm really terrified. But I don't want this to be real. I really don't want this to be real.
Yeah. Yeah, I want this all to be nonsense. So y'all, so if you're watching this, then you are likely into some spooky nonsense. So let me give you a little bit of a recommendation for a little movie that, if you're in any way, shape, or form into cosmic horror, it's called Event Horizon. Now, I
Yes.
am a fan of going to movies that return to theater. The missus and I do it. It's one of it's really, at this point, it's the most that we go to the movies versus like seeing modern stuff. um and dude, I grew up like legitimately. I was in the same room as one of the actors from Nightmare on Elm Street, and I had made a comment to him. I was like, "Yeah, dude, I was like 5 the first time that I saw Nightmare," and he just gives me this look like, 5? Like, there are very few horror movies that really legitimately creep me out, because I was always very good at the separation of church and state, the separation of like, this is a
Yes.
movie and this is real life. Um that one, like, in a special kind of way, screwed with me, because
Mm.
you mean to tell me that there is a school of thought that says, as I sit here, as I live and breathe, a a crack in the fabric of the dimension can get just appear, and some friggin' tentacle thing is gonna come out of nowhere, and all of that's the thing. Like, nope, no thank you. Like, I would give me Linda Blair, give me the friggin' Exorcist with the pea soup and the whole night. I don't care. Like, give me Pazuzu, it's fine. I'd rather Pazuzu than an interdimensional octopus. Like, no, like, absolutely not. Cthulhu is the thing of nightmares.
100%. Yeah, the word Lovecraftian has been thrown around this story for a reason, and it's for stories like this. Lovecraft, the man himself, love his work. He's a bit of a hard pill to swallow at times as a person. But you know what? You know, we have to say that because we're in modern times. Uh, but at the end of the day, like the things he was scared of, and then turning them into things that I think you should be scared of them too. He did a really great job at that, because the man was not really fond of the ocean, of shellfish, of cephalopods. He also wasn't very fond of foreigners, and so he put all that together to make the literal outsider to come in and like menace people. And it's stories like this to go, if that is real, I want none of it.
Yeah, yeah. It's the consummate asterisk, right? So whenever you're talking about Poe, or you're talking about Lovecraft, or you're talking about these guys that sit as um antiques of their time. And I don't mean that necessarily disrespectfully, though I'm always one to give a backhanded compliment to those guys, because really, in all legitimacy, scumbags, absolutely scumbags. But but people that told stories that got to the heart of the matter in some way, shape, or form, and that's why they endure. Now, I will go out on a limb, and you guys come for the main story, and then you stay for all of these little rabbit trails. So here's one for you. I think the enduring legacy of Lovecraft has been benefited beyond measure by opening up the canon and allowing other people to write in it that weren't racist scumbags. Like, seriously,
Absolutely.
if the entire legacy sat on the shoulders of H.P. Lovecraft, that would have been forgotten to time. That would have been a relic that didn't age well, that sits in the past. And I would also argue that there's a reason why, more often than not, if you're going to find a Lovecraft adaptation that people go wild over, or people really celebrate, or something along those lines, it's going to be outside of the actual telling. It's going to be outside of the actual book, the actual story, the actual presentation. Why? Because there's generally some four-letter words that tell you exactly what he thought about people who didn't look like him. We'll say it like that. You know what I mean? So I think you take a
Yes.
lot of these concepts, but like, still, again, I just encourage the listener, think about this for a second. We have a very finite, and trust me, America right now is showing its giant hind parts on how ignorant it is. I said what I said. It's there for a lot of people, history begins at 1776. And even before that, even for people who don't struggle with that level of needing to pull their head out of their John Hine parts. All right, I'll stop. Come on. It's still a finite like amount of time that we have had historical documentation and things like that, and the level that we actually know about the universe, and about the cosmos and the galaxy and space and stars and all of this sort of stuff, and the way that the fabric of reality works is so finite. Do not get it twisted. Do not think for a second that you are more than what you actually are, because you are an ant in the cosmos. Know that beyond a shadow of a doubt. I'm talking, we're not talking about spiritual whatever, imago Dei whatever. Like, we can talk about that, we can preach on another show. You got a couple of people who are very well versed in preaching, so if you really need to hear a theological execution on the whole thing, come talk to us. It's fine. But in the
It's-
grand scheme of the actual weight of the cosmos and the ever expanding cosmos, you are a speck. You are a granular of sand. And that is exactly that notion that this sort of storytelling preys upon. And it says, what if when you go outside your door and you see blue skies and you see green grass and you see all of the things that are going on around you, what if it's not, none of it's real? What if it's all the figment of some eldritch being's imagination, and he
Yeah.
wakes up and the whole thing is done, the whole thing just wipes off the board? What if? What if that crack appears and something comes out that you cannot actually wrap your mind around? Or what if there are locations on this planet that, for whatever reason or another, have a weaker divide in the dimensional barrier, and there really are things that, for our benefit, we shouldn't know about, and there really are things in the cosmos that we really should be separated from, in terms of a carbon based life form sort of thing.
Yeah. I'm going to touch on a couple things we said there. I'll go through your most recent. Um, the Stephen King fans out there, you know your thinnies. Dark Tower.
Mhm.
Kind of think this may be what's happening here. Not to let something go slip for possible explanations down the road. The idea of that layer between reality, other dimensions, what so have you, to allow an entity like this through, I can totally see it. But to go to the Lovecraftian ideal too is not like his idea only, but one of the other fears he had was of the unknown, of not knowing where you placed yourself in the universe because you are so small and infinitesimal, compared to everything else out there. And yeah, once again, we could give you theological stuff to help assuage your fears, but that's a different show. Right here and now, yes, I 100% agree. When you're researching things like this, you can end up there. And when you're reading stories like his, you can end up there because that was a very real fear he had. And actually getting you to feel that too shows that he is a good writer. And guess what? People contain multitudes. So you can be a good writer and also be a terrible person. That means you get to do what's known as death of the author. You can divorce yourself from the person and love what they wrote. And that doesn't mean you agree with everything that they've ever said. Same thing with a
I
political party. Whatever. Go ahead.
yeah. And I will be the first one to admit that, like, for all of my for anyone that follows the separate canons of Anazao Ministries podcast network and KFM, and you happen to be the part of the audience that's a Venn diagram that knows the different things that I talk about and different things like that, and how, oh, I don't know, socially liberal I am. This is one of
What?
those that I'm not great at it all the time. There are some instances where I cannot successfully achieve death of the author. This is one of them. I've just always been able to. That like I can definitely separate art from artist when talking about Lovecraft stuff. Um, Poe, man, Poe was a really sleazy dude. That's all I'm gonna say is Poe was a really, really sleazy guy. And I would argue that he is not as good as his contemporaries. He's just mythologized a lot because of one very, very popular story. So I'm not sure he's a good enough writer to excuse how terrible of a person he actually was. So
The mysterious death helps too.
yeah, exactly. So but yeah, that's part of it. So like I go back to the original. I go back to one of the first things that I said. This is a story that, in order to actually kick the can around, to actually sit in the context of, like, working your way through this, you have to be willing to open yourself up and say what is possible, like what is the what in all of this is real and what is not, and actually being able to have nuance to it. But in doing so, we sit here and we talk about the Lovecrafts of the world and the kings of the world and these different folklore and these different stories and all of that sort of stuff. Because, dude, this story, in order to be articulate and authentic, you have to admit to the fact that this story is dripping with it. But also note something, okay? Now, I we actually, I do think it's fair to say that you and I trade off on the things that we are hard skeptical on. Like hard, like,
It's
nah,
fair.
this is nonsense. All of that sort of stuff. You notice something. Neither one of us have crumpled up the piece of paper and thrown it in the trash can yet. Even though we've talked about all of this while and out stuff, neither one of us has crumpled up the paper yet. Maybe we'll get there. Who knows? We're not there yet. But we haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah. Yeah, my pet hypotheses here, but at the end of the day, I can't prove them. But I do want to touch on something you had said earlier too. You want to talk about some public domain and why it matters? Uh, stories, authors like Lovecraft are why it matters. The very different people who've gotten to have their takes on his stories because it fell into public domain. That's why it should exist far sooner than it does. It should be author's death plus 25
Seriously,
years versus what is it, author's death plus 50 or 75, depending on where you are and when things were written.
something like that.
I
Yeah.
it's outrageously stupid. I mean, we get the works of Derleth, Howard, um, King, Brian Keene, so much more who got to write their own interpretations of, you know, he would never use Cthulhu mythos because Cthulhu wasn't big for him. I think that was more of a Derleth thing, kind of making him like the top guy. Um, if I'm remembering my history correctly. But like to have a story and have elements in it that, yeah, like when he was alive and a little bit afterward, the estate needs to settle. There needs to be money made given to, widows or children or whatever. That's why these laws
Right.
exist for copyright. As a writer myself, while I'm alive, I better be getting paid, if you're buying a
Yep.
book that I made. Um, and I don't make that much. But you know what? I do every now and then. It's like, oh, the dopamine hit. Someone actually bought something. But when I'm gone,
Yep.
if I get married, if I have children, yeah, support them for a little bit. But after that, do your own thing. That should be for everyone else to mess with as they feel fit, as they feel free to do so. Like we wouldn't have Dracula as often as we do. We wouldn't have Frankenstein as much as we do. Disney wouldn't have the vast majority of the movies they started off doing because they were in the public domain and therefore they could make a buck of it without having to pay someone else to do it. And
Yep.
Disney was a huge motivator. Sorry, I know we're on a rant. We're 50 steps away from where we started, but this is something that's really near and dear to me. Um, they're a big reason why the copyright laws are as stringent as they are and last as long as they do. And finally, things are going around. And that doesn't mean that I'm so very happy I get to watch Popeye the Slayer Man or Winnie the Pooh Blood and Honey. Like they serve a role. I've watched those. Or what was the Steamboat Willie one? That's the one I haven't seen yet. But like what that does is it opens things up to telling new stories with something, a creation someone else made. Like thinking like we talked about King Arthur a while back. The different stories that have been told about him, you can make him whatever you want to be. You can make Merlin whoever you want him to be because it started off here. Now we've got this grand thing of, an open media. You don't have to give residuals or anything to anyone else or royalties. So make your own story.
Yeah.
Be creative with it. So I know, once again, huge side tangent, but you made me think about it and I'm passionate about it. So anything you
Yeah.
want to add
Yeah.
before we
No,
move on?
I'm right there. I'm right there. I'm right there with you. The laws are absurd, and it's beautiful when we get a chance to see somebody play with somebody else's toys that they created. And yeah, sure, have it hang around for a decade or more, whatever. But like beyond that point, no, then it becomes public. But yeah, so we say all of that to say yes, the parallels, they do exist, but just because somebody talked about a thing doesn't mean that their fictional account of it is the only story about it or the only reality about it.
Yes. All right. So to get the wheels back on track here, um, in 1887, 8 years later from when we last were on the tracks, we get one of the famous stories that comes here too. Probably either the second or first, depending on who you're going to ask. Outside of the nobleman from last time, two sailors from the HMS Penelope drunkenly made their way into the house in order to escape from the rain. This was in a period of the house's legacy where it was owned by people. They weren't like taking care of it and weren't renovating it. They had like servants and everything, like looking after stuff, but it wasn't, if I'm remembering correctly, people actually living in it. And there may be
Okay.
another reason for that later on. Um, so to get away from the rain, they spent the night there in the attic room. Obviously, they didn't know the stories, and it was there where they reportedly witnessed an unspeakable being they couldn't put into words. One of them because he's not going to make it. The other because it drove him to a fit of terror. They fled the house, and depending on who's telling the story, one of them died in the escape, either from the shock of what he saw or from terror, ended up tripping and falling, or because he was drunk, he made a wrong move and fell down some stairs. Point is, one of them made it, the other one didn't. The surviving sailor reported to the police that he had been assailed by the mad ghost of Myers, who warned them away from his property. And but that's one possible story there. There's also the one where it was Myers and something he couldn't even put into words. There was one where it's only the thing he couldn't put into words. Joe, have at it.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty straightforward. This is another one where multiple accounts all take place and each one of them highlight something um very specific.
Yeah. And this is where we kind of reach pretty much the end of the story. There have been every now and then someone will claim something happened in this specific year, not as much verifiable compared to the other stories. But eventually in the 1930s, the building would be bought by the Maggs brothers, who were very big into antique books and reselling them. So it would kind of sort of become a bookstore. They would renovate it there. And according to them, and according to people who've taken ownership since then, nothing otherworldly or paranormal has happened since. Every now and then you might get a story of someone trying to say, yeah, I would stayed the night there in 75 or whatever, and this thing happened. Most of those, in my opinion, sound like people trying to stir up tourism and get people to head that way, because I believe this is part of several ghost walk tours, if not its own, at some point in time. So that's where we get like the end of the history. As far as we are aware, nothing major has happened since that day.
Yeah, it's 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 one of those cases where you look at it and you're like, man, crazy. Alongside the advent of documentation methods and the standards changing and all of that sort of stuff, these events seem to taper off in exact parallel. You know what I mean? Like I get it.
Yeah,
I do.
yeah,
And
yeah.
again, it's the two stories being told simultaneously, and you have these accounts where you have crazy stuff that takes place in this place, but also at the other hand, like every single step of it, you can 1000% um make a statement that says, "Oh, I'm going to hand wave it away," or "I'm going to, this is the low key, this is the low key uh, explanation of it," and all of that, and like it's fitting that it would go into um the level of dormancy that it does, because and this gets into some of my takes on really this as a whole, but um I think there's a through line that you can see in some of this, that if you look for it, where the stories, they persist. The stories are told about this and that, and this happened and that happened, and all of that sort of stuff. Now, they might just be ghost stories, but they're stories nonetheless. Likewise, we go back to the very beginning of the story. Now, I threw it in there because I think it matters in a potential explanation for this. Remember that there was somebody in the house that and again, I'm a bit newer to the case, so not everybody's name sticks with me, but the person that was suspected of occult practice, that may have been agoraphobic and
Myers.
may have been, yeah, yeah, yeah. So I'll make it. I'll bring it in to reality to kind of transfer or transition us into talking about, like, kind of the overview explanation of what we think might be happening here and all of that sort of jazz. um with the church, one of the potential explanations is that we we live in an area that is very post-Catholic, very post-Baptist, very, very, very filled with old folklore from mountains, religious trauma, and all of that sprung out um, a very, very heavy presence of neo-paganism and neo-Wiccan practices. I'll say it like this: I don't think that the call was, "Don't do this stuff," because it's all hocus pocus and mumbo jumbo. Do I think some of it's hocus pocus and mumbo jumbo? Yes, yes, I do. Just like I think
Mhm.
some, you know, people teaching Christian principles are full of crap too. You know what I mean? Like you can
Yes.
take your pick. I don't care. Like whatever. Somebody got it wrong is the answer. But I think just because somebody got it wrong doesn't mean that it invalidates everything. And I just think that I think it's very short-sighted of humanity to say that there is a one or one and a handful of other spiritual beings. If we are saying that there is this ultimate deity that started everything, that created everything, that is one and three and all the things that Christianity says about it, then how dare we close our minds to the idea of there being any sort of uh, plurality or any sort of extension of the spiritual existence, that yes, Lord of Lord, King of Kings. Well, I don't know, but like within language, that suggests that there has to be more than one. If you are going to say that this one is above the other ones, then there has to be other ones for the one to be over. Seems like it makes sense to me. Um, and so I say all of that very tongue in cheek, but the reality is, I just do believe that there is something that goes bump in the night. I think that there are things that you can screw with and tap into things that are just above your pay grade. And then you get somebody who doesn't really know what they're doing, and they open up something, and they don't know how to close it. And now suddenly there's a big gaping friggin' door, and now whatever has come through it. You know what I mean? And so
Mm.
I think there are threads here that when you look at the the legacy of this location, I think either one at least holds water, of the fact that who knows what that dude was doing. He may have just been addled. He might have just been wandering around his house, and he just survived however long he survived, and that was the end of it, and all of that. Um, just like, dude, if you have a place where everybody's saying that this exists and that exists and this thing happened and that thing happened and this person's bad energy and that person's bad energy, and you just keep dumping things into the pot, and you're just dumping all of that into that space, sometimes you keep perpetuating bad energy in a place. That bad energy stays. That bad energy cultivates things like that. And so I think when you look at the legacy of it, I think when you see the tapering off of it, it sits dormant. These stories fall into the category of nonsense or gossip or bad takes or whatever, and suddenly you stop pouring as much negativity in over time, over time, over time. Then maybe that crack starts to repair. Maybe that energy starts to dissipate. Maybe the area starts to clear itself of whatever it is that's going on there. So maybe you have a legacy of something being present or something being true, and now that thing is not true anymore, and now something else is true. It doesn't mean that this over here was never true. It just means that it's no longer true. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm not opposed to the idea of there being a rift or whatever in time and space or between realities, dimensions, what have you. And then over time, that thing that got ripped was repaired in some way, shape, or form. I mean, there's a myriad of ways that could have happened. But getting into the potential explanations themselves, the easiest one, the one that starts off with before you get into the wild and wackier stuff, ghosts. Joe has been on record multiple times over about he doesn't think about how your old Aunt Sally or what have you, and he's very vehement about that. I am not on that side. I think it is possible more for it to be, the soul of someone left behind for a bit, or has maybe refused to pass on, or maybe there even may be an intention for God to allow someone to remain for a time, maybe to solve a murder, maybe to point someone elsewhere. I don't know for sure. I can't prove it. Now, when it comes to this story alone, we have in some accounts a brown mist or an even woman in white. We also have Myers' ghost himself in some of the later tellings of the story showing up. So, do I think this is the end all be all explanation? No, I think it may be just a part of what's going on here. Uh, Go ahead and throw your thoughts out, Joe.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm tracking with you.
Okay. So that's the ghost side. Now we go to what has been kind of the major focus. I mean, we kind of gave away a little bit of how we think on some of this, not completely because there's other explanations, but the rip between the planes, the thinny, as it were, using a Stephen King cosmology, in that somehow, in some way, maybe because of a great tragedy, maybe because of powers beyond our understanding, something was able to come this way, or maybe it intentionally did it for a time to head to our reality and mess with people. And that nameless thing that we can't describe, yeah, it's a huge cliche in Lovecraft's writings because, well, he was of the opinion that if you, the more ambiguous you make it, the more scary it is. And that's one issue I do have with his writing because that's not me at all. You explain that sucker, you show me that shark. I don't care if it's breaking down. Eventually, I got to see the monster. But I can
Yeah.
still believe in something that terrifies someone to the point where they can't describe it because they've been addled with fear or addled in the mind because of seeing something they can't comprehend.
So, one of the things that I think is fascinating is that you can ask two people about the present state of a reality and they can tell you two different things. I think that's fascinating. And it's not even anything spooky or nonsensical. It's color blindness. It's um impairment. It is mental processing. It is very scientific and very ordinary explanation as to why two people can see something and experience something in vastly different ways, but be present in the exact same moment. Um, yes, I struggle with the idea of it being Aunt Sally. I have not seen anything clear cut enough outside of dreams to have had experiences where I interacted with individuals that were sentient of their personhood to a degree that couldn't be chalked up to the embodiment of residual energy, which I wouldn't say. It's like the husk. It's like this wrapper here had a cough drop in it. Now it's just a wrapper. The cough drop's gone. You know what I mean? Like the cough drop was no longer
It
in
doesn't
the
have the
wrapper,
same
that sort of thing.
substance.
Exactly, exactly. I think the substance has been separated from the husk, and the husk is what you're experiencing. I've never experienced a level of sentience out of a human form spirit ever. So I would have to be convinced that that is a thing. Um, Though I'm not as hard nosed as you may think on the whole idea of that conflicting with theology. I don't think it's necessarily a problem with it conflicting with theology. I just haven't yet to experience it. And the way my brain processes energy and dimension and all of that sort of stuff, it gives a lot of room for extra dimensional quantum this and that, and less room for human spirits. Um, so I I think there's a reality where this is a place that has had a lot of tragedy in it, and thus the energy is tainted in
Mhm.
this location. And likewise, to go back to the experiencing the same thing from two different perspectives thing, consciousness and perception are still things that we are trying to wrap our mind around. And I believe part of that is it's the divine breath of God. What the hell are you gonna do? Like, what? I challenge you to try to write me a doctorate level thesis statement on the breath of God. You know what I mean? Like that sort of thing. So there's a part of that where yes, it does tie to my faith. Yes, it does tie to the fact that I fundamentally believe that we are created people, that we did not come together through the process of evolution and all of that sort of stuff. So there is a part of it there. Um, I think I think you you have to be aware of the fact that if you're going to accept a man came back from the dead, then you have to open up to the idea that there is more than one plane of existence.
Yes.
And I think we are protected in a way by experiencing something in 3 and 4 dimensions. Now, the question becomes, what happens when the safety breaks? What happens when the dam breaks? Now, perception matters. What if the thing behind the curtain can be seen differently by different people? What if it is 1000% perception based? What if it is based around what you actually conceive of it? Again, I open up to anybody who come hard, because if you're gonna sit there and tell me that I sound like I've read one too many King or Lovecraft novels, I probably have. But the reality is, I would then argue you on it, because like there's if you're starting at a presupposition of science, nothing I'm talking about is outside the realm of quantum theory. If we're talking about about spirituality, nothing I'm talking about is outside the realms of what we call synchroset. If we're working off the same premise, nothing I've said so far breaks the rules. And so what if there is something that responds to, and that, yes, I will pull out a work of fiction to illustrate the point. Pennywise, the dancing clown. The reason why
Mm.
Pennywise is a clown is because fear essentially seasons the meat for the being that Pennywise is. And the form is so incomprehensible that it drives you mad, that it's called the deadlights. It's just floating like orbs that just cause madness and all
Yes.
of that. Now, I'll go back to a very real portion of it. Two people can look at the same thing, horrific thing. One person's screwed, like traumatized, like it breaks them. Another person looks at it, acknowledges the tragedy of it, is not broken by it. Again, it's a sliding scale, and I'm not even getting supernatural here. It's proven in our state of existence. And so I think if you look at what is possible, I think it makes less sense for it to be so individualized, because there's not enough of a through line of experience. I think if it were people, I think if it were human based spirits, I think there would be far more continuity. I think looking to an extra dimensional being or rift or something along those lines that splays open this space and has people experience different people. Like two people are drunk, one person doesn't make it, one person makes it out. Two people are drunk, one person sees one thing, one person sees another thing. One person stays there overnight and they're horrified. One person's like, it's so it seems so tailored to be an attack on the psyche rather than an outright vicious attack like you would normally see associated with spectral hauntings. And that's what's compelling. If I thought it was just a ghost story, I would chalk this up to nonsense. I would be like, okay, it's a bad take from England, man. Shocker. But it's a bad take from Victorian England. And it is what it is. Um God, there's something crunchy there with the whole idea of a space where something is able to feed off of the people that are there. And something we don't necessarily fully understand is has happened that transitioned that space away from being true, whatever that is. Like, if it's energy based, if it's whatever, like, but again, we go back to the Lovecraft of it all. Sometimes the most horrifying thing is that you don't get an answer, that whatever just happened, like like it just stopped. And it's in that silence afterwards that you feel so damn uncomfortable. But again, what if we're talking about hope beyond measure and all of this sort of stuff, what if there is terror beyond measure? What if there are things that truly and completely do go bump in the night that we were never meant to or equipped to be able to handle?
Do you see why I chose this one, guys? Uh, I knew this was going to come out of Joe in some way, shape, or form. The joy of a child, talking about one of his favorite subjects, uh, the the inevitability of death and your inability to do anything about it, or your smallness in the universe. I know, my man. Uh, I could have just chosen another ghost. I could have done the Gray Man. In North and South Carolina, he always shows up right before a hurricane. You could have
Yep.
done the Boilie Rectory or something like that. But when I remembered the potential eldritch elements in this story, I had to make it this one, uh, because you got what you got out of him, and we all got to experience it together. Um, I'm with you. Is it possible for there to be some form of entity out there that you and I can both look at it and we're not hallucinating it, but it is choosing to show itself to us in different ways? I can get behind that. The Pennywise uh, analogy there is quite apt, because Pennywise changes based on what whoever it is going to. If it needs to be a giant Paul Bunyan, it's going to be a giant Paul Bunyan. If it needs to be a giant leeches flying in the air, it's going to be flying giant leeches. What does it take for me to make you as terrified as possible? And then to make things worse, if you're going to confront me, I'm going to show you the beyond that you can't even conceive of, to make you melt in fear and not being able to understand. And it's only because you're able to group together and fight against me that I'm able to be taken down eventually. Um, could that be a being like that? Sure. I can't, take a bullet for it, but I still think, based off of the accounts given, if they are to be trusted, something weird is here, and it's something that doesn't follow into the nice little box I like to put things in, because yes, I love my boxes. I love my absolutes. I love to put them there, but I can put this in kind of sort of a box, but I can't like seal the box completely.
Yeah. Yeah. It certainly has the trappings of an enduring amalgamation of a variety of folkloric tradition, and that's why it sticks around. That's why, again, to be authentic to it, um you have to tell both stories. You have to allow both to breathe simultaneously, because literally every single step, that's why I kept laying the breadcrumb trails. And there's really no way to lay the breadcrumb trails without, like you said, giving it up a little bit of what you really believe to be going on here, because any one of these individual stories falls apart. And when you only look at it as a collection of individual pieces, when that's the only space that you allow this to occupy, then it becomes a lot less believable. It becomes a lot more likely to be a series of bad takes, or a series of gossip articles, or a series of whatever that ultimately lead to the sum total of like this story. Um, but if there's any level of credibility to be given to the entirety of the event, then it just feels like this story plays a lot better if there's an overarching idea, if there's an overarching thing that is the source of it, even if it's not one direct being, even if it is an exposure to something that is essentially tantamount to you look into the void long enough and the void looks back, sort of thing.
Mm.
Like you are opening up something and allowing for the greater beyond to reach into your existence. um that's why I think in order to really process a story like this, you can't get caught in any of the bear traps. You can't get caught in, oh, this story is to this, to that, whatever this, whatever that, because there's too many other things going on. Like, okay, if that's not true, then what about this totally unconnected thing over here? Because you're talking about stories that range from noblemen to um like sailors, you know what I mean? So there's not it
Yeah.
there's very little continuity when it comes to the actual persons that are involved.
Mm. Yeah. So we've got two other potential things here. I'm going to skip ahead to the other one because I think if we ended with that, it'd be more of a whimper, because it is what it is. So speculation has been brought up that th- this has been falsified and based off of storytelling of a noted author of the time, Edward Bulwer Lytton. Now, you probably don't know the man's name, but you've definitely heard some of the things he said before. He's the guy, just to start off with the most cliche thing ever in the writing world, it was a dark and stormy night. That's the guy who came up with that phrase. Oh, we also get, pursuing the almighty dollar, the pen is mightier than the sword, a couple more phrases like that. But he's the guy who came up with it. And a lot of people like to make fun of him because, he would write these cliches over and over again. In
Yeah,
fact, like, there's a festival, a contest that's held every year to like try to find like the worst opening sentence because he would use "It's a dark and stormy night" to open up, I believe, more than one set of short stories and books. And people were like, "Oh, you can't keep doing this." One was fine, but you keep going, man. Um,
that's
so
funny.
one of his short stories, "The Haunted and the Haunters," which I read, contains elements similar to this. Some people accuse, uh, from what I do remember of the story, they're similar in the fact that there's ghosts, and there's a house
Yeah.
that's haunted. So, wah wah. I didn't want to end us there. Any thoughts before we move on, Joe?
Yeah, no, I think you're safe to move on.
Okay. So the other story I do find compelling in other ways, and I kind of hinted at it, is the idea of this being a hoax, but not the newspaper hoax kind, because that is something that's an accusation that's been made. The newspapers, magazines of the era would try and drum up, make money. It's like, oh, it's totally haunted. Oh, he's doing these satanic rituals or whatever in the house, and that's why he's doing it at night. And that's definitely part of the times, and it's definitely something to be brought up, like we did. Um, but when you actually look into the stories we have, I don't see this as compelling. What I do find compelling is the period of time after his death. There's this long stretch of time where we may actually be dealing with a legitimate Scooby Doo hoax. And that fascinates me in the idea of people dressing up or at a time where, we don't have modern media, so not everyone's scared of a bed sheet ghost or what have you. And they were using this potentially a group of criminals who had bought the place to smuggle goods in and out of the port. And it was a fine staging house going at night. Less people would be involved, less policemen around walking the area, so you could to keep people away. Build up the story of this place is totally haunted. You want to be anywhere near there. If you see lights, that means there's a ghost up there. Stay away. While they're just using that opportunity to smuggle things from different parts of the British Empire or illegal trade and contraband. But this one doesn't have enough evidence behind it for me to absolutely say that this is what it is. But if
Yeah.
it is true, I mean, yeah, I find the idea of the fabric between worlds being ripped that pretty cool too. But also, if there's an actual legitimate Scooby Doo hoax out there, someone who loves his Scooby Doo, I,
Yeah.
I'm 100% behind it if that's true. And this may also have been one of the things that we didn't really touch on too much, is that this story over time gets bigger and bigger and bigger with each new retelling. One of the possible sources, I didn't see anyone else touch on this, and if someone did, I'm not the first person, I'm not original, I don't care, uh, are the Dr. Sin novels. You guys probably aren't familiar with that. Dr. Sin is a character first created in 1915. For my hammerheads out there, you've probably seen what was originally called Captain Clegg, but because we're more hardcore in America, we called it The Night Creatures, where this is actually the
Oh
first
yeah,
novel
yeah, yeah.
being adapted. And he plays like the role of the Scarecrow, whose job it is to like, over his men. He's pretending to be a priest, while also at the same time used to be a smuggler and a pirate. And the Scarecrow is a position he kind of plays to keep people away from their smuggling operations. So that's it. What do you think about all that, Joe?
I mean, if none of it's real, and it is a fabrication, or even if humans help perpetuate the aura that, like, Cthulhu started, uh I want that to be true. I want that to be some part of it, but what I want is that it actually be legitimately haunted, but they are also doing that at the same time and don't realize that it's actually haunted. I think that would be phenomenal. Yeah, I mean, it goes right along with it, man. Like, you gotta, when you look at it, like, this is one of those cases that part of the intrigue is the duality, is the fact that, like, both of these things, you do not like. Again, ghosts, I'm the least sold there. But you have these two that, like, you have just about equal weight and measure if you look at the totality of everything. So, like, this place has a background, has a lineage, all of that sort of stuff, and people want to be able to do business without having other people poking around and all that sort of stuff. Well, yeah, you hide in plain sight, perpetuate the stigma and all that sort of stuff. Like, that makes all of the sense in the world that criminals would do that. And yes, it is absolutely ridiculous, but it's, you cannot knock it off the board entirely.
So I threw that one in there. Not a lot of people have speculated that, but enough did to be like, okay, if I consider it, I could see it. If it is truly both of these things being true, once again, I'm with Joe, it would make things 10,000 times better. And that there is an actual entity out there ripping between the veils. Maybe there's also a ghost involved, but there's also criminals using a Scooby Doo hoax at the same time, a triple threat. I mean, sign up. Let's make that movie right here and now. I am all for that. But that's where we fall. Guys, thank you very much for listening in on this episode. Having a lot of fun here. If you're listening to this on YouTube, leave a like, comment down below. If you're listening in podcast form, please, once again, feel free to share this with other people so we can reach more. We're going to be better about this. I'll promise every time, like a very abusive relationship, we will come back and we do love you. Uh, I think I speak for Joe there too. So as we end off today, what do you believe, dear listeners and viewers? Was 50 Berkeley Square ever haunted? And if so, then what by? The ghost, an eldritch abomination, British people, or something else? We didn't touch on everything that the night has to offer this evening, so let us know in the comments below if there's something you'd like us to do a follow up on. Next time, we will be doing Religious Strangers, so we have not finalized what we're doing yet. Joe and I will be talking off screen later on about that. But when we do come back, expect more Religious Strangeness. So until next time, see ya.